Welcome to Watch Symposium. I'm Austin. The Iconaut is leaving for a service. It's coming back. I love this watch. All right, so here's the plan. I'm going to take it in and I'm going to get the Iconaut, which has a new dial. And before I do any of that, I need to go over this watch because I've really never gone into it. And so I'm going to use the 5-factor model of watch assessment. Link in the description if you don't know what that is. But it's a model of 5 categories that allows us to explore the details of the watch. In this video, I'm going to go over the first 2, form and function. All right, let's start with form. Well, the form of this watch is probably the most controversial aspect about it. And it's a big watch, 43 millimeters. And a lot of it's in the case and the bezel, not a lot in the dial. Now, I've come to grips with it. It's just part of the Iconaut. I mean, you could say, I wish the Iconaut was smaller, but its very identity is a big watch. So it's something you either come to grips with or not. I have, and related to that is the case. So let's go into the case, and it's a cushion case. I've never been a fan of cushion cases. I don't like blocky cases either. I think the 5-digit Rolexes have a perfect balance of curvature and hard lines. This is a little round for my taste, but it works with such a big, tall watch. If you said, well, would it be better if they put some curves on it? I don't know, all right? I think maybe no. It might start looking like the slab-sided, real thick, current Tudors. So it might be actually the best case style, all right? And I will say that I like the curvature of the case. It really sits, I don't know if you can see that, it really sits on the wrist well. So it's a 43 millimeter watch, but it wears very well, very comfortably. Also an aspect of the comfortability of the watch, and I know we're touching on wearability here, which is another factor, is the bracelet. It's the style of an oyster bracelet, but the links are smaller, so it's very comfortable. It's a comfortable bracelet. Now, it's got the clamshell clasp. That would be an older clasp, so some people who are used to the newer modern clasps might call this one junk. Totally unfair to call it junk, but it's an older clasp. All right, still looking at form, let's look at the dial. Now, I'm a minimalist. I like minimal things on the dial, but things can get kind of boring, and there's a lot going on with the dial. A lot of shapes, a lot of textures, a lot of different colors, and it provides you a lot of eye candy, and so I do appreciate that, and I think they lay out the chronograph in a very interesting way with the subdials. They're all different. And you look at something like the Daytona or the Speedmaster, you know, the subdials all resemble one another. Minute differences, of course, but they're all very unique on this watch, and that's something I appreciate. Let's talk about the textures. Well, you've got concentric circles on the minute subdial at the 12. You have the sunburst brushing on the silver part of this, and then you've got some recessed areas and some painted areas. So it's a very interesting watch to look at. When you zoom down, you can see tachometer is written. You probably wouldn't notice if you didn't get it under a loop, but there's a red drop shadow on that. And speaking of the tachometer, it's got a tachometer and it's on the bezel, which I think is very unique. One of the most controversial aspects of this watch is the bezel. It's big, it's metal, it's fixed, it's a 24-hour bezel. Now, I love the Rolex Explorer 2 metal bezel, and that's a defining characteristic of that watch, and I appreciate the similarities between this bezel and that bezel. I feel like there's a connection there that resonates with me. The size of it is probably the biggest issue with people, but I think it's very fitting, and what I'm about to tell you may change your opinion on how you view the bezel, because I think it is essential to the watch and the identity of the watch. Now, this is a chronograph, and chronographs use a lot of space on the dial on the side. You've got the buttons, you've got the subdials. Oftentimes, you've got a tachometer on the bezel of the watch. it takes up a lot of real estate. And this has a GMT function, it's got a fourth hand, and it would be very easy for that function to be overshadowed by all the space taken up by the chronograph. It would be very easy for this to look like a chronograph with a GMT hand stuck in. If you had a really small, I guess, less obvious bezel, and that's why I think the bezel is so important. It asserts that this is not a chronograph with a GMT function. In fact, this is probably a GMT function watch with a chronograph. At the very least, it's a 50-50 split. But from far away, you can tell that this is a GMT function watch. And so I really think the bezel, the size of it, the pronounced aspect of it is really important in that it asserts that it's not a GMT watch as an afterthought. In fact, it's probably a GMT watch with, well, a chronograph as an afterthought. That's unfair too. So it's balanced there with the functions, something I really appreciate, and you would lose that if you had a smaller, subtle bezel. Moving into the second factor in our 5-factor model, function and functionality. While we're on this subject, let's talk about the bezel. Would it be more functional if it had a rotating bezel? Yes, but it would be a trade-off. It would change the aesthetics of the watch completely, so it would infringe on the form of the watch. I'm not sure it would be a trade I'd be willing to make, but again, it would make the watch more functional. You could change time zones easier by rotating the bezel. It would mean losing the 24 numeral at the top in favor of a triangle. I wouldn't want that, but you would be able to mark times. You can still do that with the chronograph. In fact, I did it the other day. It's a little bit clunky. It takes time. I wanted to mark a time at 11 past the hour, so I started the chronograph, and when the second hand hit 11, I pushed the button. It took 11 seconds to do it. Obviously, if you're marking a point in time at, say, the 55-minute mark in this way, it's going to be a lot harder. You're going to have to wait around 55 seconds to make that happen, but it is a solution. Now, there's not the fiddly aspect of a rotating bezel. There's a solidness, and so it's tough to decide which I would rather have, but it really wouldn't be the Iconaut without the fixed metal bezel. So I don't think I would change anything, but it could be more functional with a rotating bezel. Looking at the factor of function and functionality, that is the category in which the Iconaut really shines. As you know, it's chock full of functions: date, chronograph, GMT function. It's got all of the essential functions, and I think it excels in this category more than any other mechanical watch. Let me know in the comment section, is there anything that can really stand up to the number of functions on this watch? Certainly nothing that Rolex produces or really has ever produced, or Tudor. So I think it's very special in that aspect. That's what I love about the watch. It's got all of the functions that I think are essential with nothing gratuitous. No moon phase, no power reserve. Would it be better if it had a day? Yes, but I wouldn't want that at the top, like a day date. If it had the day right next to the date window, that would be great, like they do it on Seikos, but Rolex doesn't do days like that, neither does Tudor, so that would never happen. I would like that, I would appreciate it, but really would start to look like a Seiko probably if it had that. That'll do it for this video. In the next video, we'll talk about how this watch fares in terms of the other 3 of the 5 factors in our 5-factor model. But in this video, we talked about the form, the function. When it comes to the form of this watch, it's obviously very subjective, but for me, it's a very unique watch. It's nothing that Rolex or Tudor has really ever made before, and I love that unique aspect, and a big part of that are the aesthetics of the watch. And that's also the most polarizing part of the watch, the aesthetics. In terms of function, that's the strongest aspect of the watch. That's what drew me to the watch, all of the functions, and that's what keeps me satisfied with this watch. It just delivers in terms of functionality. It has for months now, and you're looking at a very satisfied watch guy who's been a one watch guy for 4 months, and it all has to do with the functionality of the watch. Let me know what you think. Take care. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for part 2 when we really explore the Iconaut. Take care.